Welcome back, AP. All right. Not going to try and make this crazy long, but we're going to wrap up all the Russia stuff in this flip, right? And just really, really get after it. Now, the plan is to start your nation building section of European history this coming week, all right? I'll bring in all the stuff. I'll let you know exactly what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, to be able to keep up with content, you should expect to be still doing like flips and stuff like that during the actual week, all right? But let's get after it. Also, the plan is that the 19th is when y'all leave, right? The plan is to have like a quiz for all the nationalism stuff, coupled with some of the Second Industrial Revolution stuff that Monday, all right? Now, before you leave anyway. All right, so Russia. We left off talking about them, right, and how they had to modernize the best they could. Now, of course, modernization is the key things that any nation has to do to keep up with the competing nations. There it is. So, there you know, that enable you to compete effectively with the leading countries at any point. We talked about some key points. 90% of them are very, very poor, live off the land. Most of them are serfs still at this point. The tilting point is the Crimean River the Crimean War, because it breaks out over who is going to protect certain shrines and Holy Land sites inside of the Ottoman Empire. But in real life, Ottoman Empire is dying. Russia wants their land. An alliance of Sardinia, France, and England unites to actually stop the expansion of Russia, right? So the thing about it is they suffer a humiliating defeat, right? We talked about this in class already. I'm just kind of re-going over everything. They suffer a humiliating defeat. They're blown out because of their outdated infrastructure. They got wagons and rivers bringing stuff to the front. It's absolutely abysmal. Peasants begin to revolt following the war, and Russia is in shambles. So, enter in one of the best czars in all of Russian history. He is a guy that deserved way better than what he got. He was treated like crap out the gate, but he was a very, very, very proactive, very, very influential figure in Russian history, Tsar Alexander II, all right? Of course, he's a Romanov. They're all Romanovs by this point. He creates the Great Russian Reforms to settle everything down, right? His first initiative, or something you need to understand. It was a good idea, Alex. It's a great idea. You tried your best, right? You did something that you thought was really going to help out. But it didn't work out the way you expected. All right, so his first initial idea is let's free the serfs, right? Let's get rid of serfdom. It's an old Middle Ages concept that none of us use anymore. Let's get rid of all that and let's push forward, right? So, problem there is just the fact that look how happy these communal organizers are. Remember I showed you this picture in class? Look how happy they are. Look at that. Because serfs are going to actually take in about half the land that they were living on, right? Now, the land was extremely expensive. Hold on one second. I got to get a cup of water, all right? The land is extremely expensive. Sorry about that. I had to go grab a glass of water. My plant looks a little dehydrated. This is my Hobbit Jade. All right, so anyway, biggest issue in this is that land is very expensive, right? So to be able to actually live on that land, function better as an economy, and push forward, the serfs begin a sense of communal atmosphere and collectivized agriculture. They begin to share in the burden with one another, which, ironically enough, sounds super communist. I just poured this water all over me, right? Well, and that's kind of the reaction or the impact that it had. It actually did turn into a very, very super communal based, very, very extremely communistic sense type of atmosphere, right? So, but these peasants were happy doing this. However, it's going to limit the progression of economic patterns. Because think about it this way. If we all in 115 owned the communal site of 115 and we had to actually stay there and work this expensive land to survive, we are going to be happy helping each other out because we're all in the same social class. And also, but with that, there's no motivation for any of us to do better, make something better, or push forward. So the serfs kind of became a little more agrarian and kind of stayed in that agrarian sect when Alexander's intentions was hoping that if we free the serfs, maybe they'll go into the cities, get jobs in factories, push industrialism forward. And it kind of failed. He also then brought in this thing called the Zemstovo, all right? It's a local government, right? It's an idea of ruling this vast Russian empire, right, with little tiny parliaments, basically. It's a local branch government where the people are elected, right? However, the people and the middle-class liberals, right, middle-class liberals in here somewhere, hoped it would develop into a parliament, but it never actually did, right? Now, the only major positives that came out of the Great Reforms, equality before the law, right, just means the aristocrats are subject to the same laws as even the poor. Russian Jews were treated much better and stopped being forced to live in certain areas and economically being restricted and things like that. Also, censorship, while still being there, was stepped down quite a bit, all right? So, and a lot of the censorship stuff was just a reaction to the French Revolution. Because if you heard that basically a revolution was started because people were swinging out pamphlets of a pantsless king being laughed at by his wife, I'm pretty sure your government would probably want to be censorship too. Now, anyway, I know it looks like he's rolling his eyes, but that's a legitimate picture of Tsar Alexander III. Now, the modernization of Russia is going to then get pushed forward by Alexander after the first kind of piddled out great reforms, and he's going to do them in two huge collective bursts, even though ironically enough the second one happens after he's already dead. Now, the first comes around 1860, which of course, what do we got to do? That's right, Cranston, we got to build some railroads, right? So the government is going to subsidize private railroad building companies. What a subsidy is the government is paying that company in the form of tax write-offs, in the form of direct payment, in the form of many other different avenues to encourage them to lay railroads. Our government subsidizes a lot of things today. We subsidize corn, soy, wheat growers, all kinds of things like that, right? Now, the infrastructure, though, that is going to be laid after these railroads come down is going to be boosted up. No more wagons, no more rivers, right? We got raw materials coming in to the giant cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, right? Creating a factory culture and a factory class itself. The negative lurking in the background is just the fact that your proletariat is growing, right? Your proletariat is growing. Your happy communal serfs are growing. So this is just becoming more of a hotbed for Karl Marx's ideas, right? Now, all of this was done under Tsar Alexander II, who was sadly assassinated by anarchists. And one of the craziest assassination stories I've ever heard. So, a lot of you are like, oh, World War I was started because of that one assassination. Well, be aware that assassination attempts on rulers have been going on for a long time. Napoleon III had assassination attempts on him, right? So many so that he was actually very close friends with Tsar Alexander II, and he gifted him a bulletproof carriage knowing that his people were going to try and assassinate him as well. And remember we talked about the Italian anarchists and how Italian anarchists were doing some large-scale terrorism throughout all of Europe, and at one point they even stabbed the Austrian queen to death with a metal file. I'm going to bring that up again when we get to 1914. This stuff had been blowing up everywhere, right? It had been going on for a long, long time. So Tsar Alexander II actually dodged multiple assassination attempts. One including a guy creates a double-barreled pistol revolver, lets it go, and the bullet flies out and hits a horse instead of Alexander. Another one being a guy actually has a very large revolver, and Alexander escapes by running in zigzag patterns, right? Another one being that they tried to blow him up in his own house while he was supposed to be eating dinner, but go figure, after he liberated Bulgaria from Ottoman rule, the Balkans, good stuff. So after he liberated them and his nephew becomes the Prince of Bulgaria or whatever, he shows up late to dinner. And then so dinner was held up a little bit, so when the bomb blew up, nobody was in the dining room. All right, so, Alexander VI is finally going to be assassinated in a much more large-scale effect because he loved to do one thing every single Sunday morning. Go see the military roll call. Calm down, Denny. All right, so now go see the military roll call, right? So he would go there, bringing with him the Chief Justice and a lot of other major figures, and they went the same route every single Sunday. So this terrorist group called the People's Will decided that that was their time to strike. One threw a bomb underneath the carriage, blowing it up and rattling the Tsar so much so. But remember, he had that bulletproof carriage from Napoleon III. So he steps out of the carriage very, very rattled and can barely hear anything, but still fine. And then another bomb comes in from an alleyway, and it blows up Tsar Alexander II, completely destroying his legs. And at one point, he was alive after the explosion for a very short period of time, but he bled out in the street. And then there actually, ironically enough, though, was a third bomb ready to go just in case that one wasn't effective. All right, so all that done under Tsar Alexander II, who's sadly assassinated, but and in his heir to the throne is Alexander III, his son, who is not as proactive as Alexander II, so things became very stymied, right? So Alexander III never pushed anything further, right? So he made no new moves to industrialize, and it just kind of crapped out, right? Well, and also it looks like he's rolling his eyes. And this is the beautiful church that was actually built on the site where Alexander was assassinated. They did that actually multiple times. Every time they tried to kill him and he lived, they would build like a church or a big gate or something like that where it happened. Now, the second burst was done after he was already dead, right? So this is getting close to the reign of Tsar Nicholas II. This actually might be in Tsar Nicholas II's reign. So this, I need to check the dates on that real quick. All right, let's check that real fast. Nicholas. Spouse ruling from 1894. So actually it started, Sergei Vitae's efforts actually started under present. They actually did start underneath Tsar Alexander III, right? And he's going to be the chief finance minister from 1890 to 1900, right? He's a key leader, okay? His big belief, his industrial backwardness is going to crush Russian power, and he was right, okay? So he decides to double the network of railways by, instead of subsidizing private companies to do them, which will only lay railroads where they benefit them, the government must ante in and buy up their own railroads and force lay them, right? Throw up high tariffs and make it so people are buying just Russian goods for a while. And then also let's create the gold standard, which is the way of the West and the way they've been doing it and the way that we have not, which is stupid. All right, so he creates the gold standard within inside of Russia, helping boost their economy and giving it more international, effectiveness. All right, so he also was a genius because he was like, let's let the Westerners help Westernize us, right? And he creates this thing called the outsourcing model in Russia. Now, is it called the outsourcing model? No, it's what I call it, all right? So he paid foreign companies and created tax-based incentives for them to put their factories in Russia to employ and create a new network of funds, right? Hiring more people in Russia, hiring more figures to come through, and actually this is going to help very well because they're still mostly peasants at the time, but now at least Russia's hiring their own people, right? But then everything's going to kind of just hit the fan when the Russian Revolution of 1905 happens, right? Because tensions are beginning to build under this dummy. So Tsar Alexander III dies, right? His son takes over, Tsar Nicholas II, the famous Tsar Nicholas II. Anastasia's father, Tsar Nicholas II, right? Just say Tsar Nicholas II. Good job, Grace, Kieran, Annie, Jules. I heard all you guys say it. Jenna Brady. So Tsar Nicholas II, very, very, very prominent figure in Russian history, all right? He's the Romanov when you think of the Romanovs. Now, what he tries to do on the heels of Sergei Vitae, so we had Sergei, such a good name. So we had Tsar Alexander II's big industrial burst. Sergei Vitae's big industrial burst. Nicholas II then tries to have a big industrial burst. But what he wants to do is a little bit different. He doesn't see industrialization as the way to burst forward in modernizing. He sees imperializing as the way to burst forward because all the Western countries had already been doing it, right? So Russia began to imperialize Chinese Manchuria, which is just an absolute battled over, wrecked, destroyed, mushed, taken, exacerbated area in China that's just been taken over multiple times due to the fact that it has a huge pipeline of raw materials coming through it and it's got a lot of economic positives to actually owning that area. The problem is Japan wants it to, right? So Russia sends boats down there to try and create naval bases. Japan then attacks them. And from 1904 to 1905 was the Russo-Japanese War, which the Russians should have won easily because half of the Japanese warriors were still considered samurai, all right? And Russia suffers another humiliating defeat at the hands of a barely industrialized Japan, right? So, big black eye for Nicholas II right there, right? And then in 1905, Russian workers, due to the fact that they were all fighting the Japanese, right? They were all fighting the Japanese. They began to mobilize an illegal labor party because the unions were actually outlawed in Russia, right? Vying for a liberal democratic government, right? The army was occupied in Japan. The poor, with the support of the minority nationalities, mobilized in 1905, right? And in 1905, this event called Bloody Sunday occurs, right? In January of 1905, a peaceful crowd of people assemble out front of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to present a petition. What do you think happens? You guessed it. Hundreds were killed when the military opened fire on the crowd, right? So that's Bloody Sunday. Put a star next to it. It's very important. The major effect is this is going to create an extreme amount of contempt for the czar, right? And the monarchy by the working class. So what they're going to do after Bloody Sunday, instead of attacking via violence like they do in 1917, this triggers multiple uprisings by workers and troop mutinies from the military, right? So the troops that are coming back in from a failed invasion of Japan and an embarrassing defeat start turning on their actual military officers, and workers begin to actually have massive strikes throughout the month of October. So the sort of kind of success is the fact that you'll see why I say sort of in a minute, but there was this huge general labor strike movement in October. So the Tsar issues, Nicholas II issues this thing called the October Manifesto, right? And in the October Manifesto, it established full civil rights and created a legislative body known as the Duma. All right, so the unfortunate thing about the Duma, though, is that this is it. This is the last slide, all right? So you can pause it. I'm going to go through it really, really fast, and then we're going to wrap it up. The election of the Duma split the opposition, right? And what I mean by that is the people opposing it, okay? The middle-class liberals were in love with this idea. Your lower class, or your lower end of the aristocracy, in love with this idea. The conservatives, on the other hand, hate it. Now, the middle class suppressed the lower class rebellions, right? Feeling that they had won. Okay, so the middle class is going to tell their workers to go back to work. We have been successful. We will represent you in this new Duma. The monarchy stayed alive because they now have a constitution that is meant to back them up, right? On the eve of the first Duma, Tsar Nicholas II issues the new constitution called the Fundamental Laws, right? The Duma was supposed to be elected by universal male suffrage, right? However, it gave the Tsar an absolute veto that could be used at any moment. So is this really a legislative body at all, right? When the middle-class liberals bucked back just a little bit, saying we need to temper your absolute veto because this is not a true legislative body, he dismisses the Duma, rewrites the electoral process so that the majority would be held in the Duma by the conservative aristocracy. He abolishes community-owned property to prevent these people from staying out on their farms and encourage them to move into the cities and work in factories, and he pushes the Western factory model. Unrest in Russia had never been higher. The 1905 revolution was a failure. However, it's a step in the right direction. All right? And that's it. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Enjoy having a good time at the show. Y'all have a good one.